Hello and welcome to an episode of the Tired F1 pod. We've been missing in action over the weekend, but we've returned at a key moment. Ammar, how are you doing?
A bit rusty coming into this now, but yeah, no, we're good. Oh my goodness, how do we digest this race? I'm still trying to find that one word, right? We usually go to a word or two, right? I can't really put my head on it right now, but oof.
Yes, difficult. I mean, I felt like we saw the good, the bad, and the desperate from Max Verstappen this weekend.
Huh?
And I think before we get into the elephant in the room, which we will definitely get into, before we get into that, I thought we could just have a quick look at how the weekend had played out up until that point. So obviously Austria was a sprint weekend. Unfortunately, we weren't able to bring you the telemetry from SQ and qualifying, but it was interesting to see how that played out because in sprint qualifying, Max and Lando were really close together. They were less than a tenth off each other. Max getting pole, and if you looked at the telemetry there was you could see that Max was quick at the end of straights and Lando was quick in the middle of corners. And Lando just didn't quite have enough to overcome that end of straight speed that Max had. But the cute thing about a sprint weekend is that Parc Ferme isn't closed between the sprint race and qualifying proper. So they have like 4 hours or so, and in that gap, Red Bull made some changes to the car, which Max exploited brilliantly to end up 4/10 quicker than Lando in qualifying. That was unbelievable. What a lap. And if you watch some of the onboards there, the way he's able to flick the car through turn 6 and 7 and get the exits that he did, just unbelievable. He was absolutely planted through turn 9 and 10. So, unbelievable lap, absolutely unbelievable lap. And then we settled into a race, which, oof, I'm not going to lie, Ammar. Like, I pick up the race at 11 p.m. here. Normally I try and grab a little nap beforehand, just a little look behind the curtain. But I didn't get one. And there was a point in that race.
The first 40 laps were good enough.
Honestly, it was just. I just got to a point where it was, oof. I'm actually like my eyes were starting to close. I couldn't help it. And then Max has his final pit stop. It's a very un-Red Bull like 6.5 seconds, and from nowhere, Lando's on him. Lando suddenly, 1.5, 1.2, 1 second. Then he's in the DRS, and I thought, game on. And I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked.
Chaz, I'd like to go ahead and call this race the Red Bull gives you wings race, because you literally did. There's no better way to do it. You couldn't have had enough Red Bull cans. But I think you're spot on. I think the first 40 laps were just like, oof, like, and then of course, I mean, the last race wasn't. Well, it was okay, relatively speaking, right? But I was I was like, what are we going to talk about today? But
Me too.
Evidently,
we're going to have to go back to the sprint race to have something to talk about.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Lando.
Thank you, Lando. Exactly. But I do want to quickly go back to that sprint race, though, because I think it heralded something. I think there's been I've certainly talked about it on this channel, and I think it's gone around as well that perhaps Lando was a bit too polite in certain situations. And I have to say the crux of what my argument was going to be today was that we're still watching Lando learn how to fight in a championship, and perhaps that's a problem, right? Because you saw what happened in Barcelona, and then it happened again in the sprint race, right? Where he had a chance to go past Max. He got past him quite brilliantly, I thought, and then had the DRS. So you kind of thought, done deal, he's got the lead, he's going to win. right? And then Max does his thing, which he has been doing more and more and more, which is that when he needs to do something, it just gets done. So into turn 4, despite the fact that Lando had DRS, Lando left in just enough space for Max to slither down the inside and take the lead back again when he really shouldn't have. And that allowed Oscar through as well into second. And at that point, I was thinking, oof, if only there was somebody else in that car, because not Max, I mean, in the McLaren, because I felt like when these situations occur, when you have a car that is able to fight for a championship, right, or fight for race wins, that opportunity doesn't come all the time. So for you to have to learn how to fight in the championship in that moment as well, puts you on the back foot. And you can't blame Lando for that. He's just not been in that situation before, right? It would be the same for George. Maybe not for Charles, because he's had a bit of that, but Lando doesn't have that. And I felt like, perhaps he was losing out because he didn't know how to fight in those situations in the way that Max has got lived experience of it. But then this happened. So Ammar, I'm going to hand over to you, man. Can you, how did you digest the last few laps of the Grand Prix?
You know what? I felt excited, elated, sad, all at the same time, right? So before I get into the specifics of it, I just kept thinking about the what ifs, right? This should be us. Like, why is McLaren and Lando taking it to Max? Like, why aren't we doing? So this again, yet another weekend now, 3 weekends in a row. I'm reminded
such a Ferrari fan,
such a Ferrari thing. I want to get that off my chest because what I'm going to say later on, some of you Max fans are going to come after me, but I just want to get that off my chest to begin with, right? And say, God darn it, like we should have been there. But I did feel happy because we did end up on the podium as a result of all of this. I'm like, okay, given that we had a double DNF in Canada,
I'll take it.
Somewhat makes up for it. I'll take it. But I mean, Charles could have been on the podium as well, evidently, right? Ifs and buts and all of that, right? I think you're right about Lando, and one of our criticisms coming into this season, if we go back to really the start of it, has been who is going to be the leader at McLaren, right? And for a while there, it looked like Oscar would take the reins, and then the last few races, Lando has been the guy in the mix. Of course, Oscar is a bit unlucky this time around with the penalty that I'm not quite sure he entirely deserved, but hey, it is what it is. Just seeing the two go at each other reminded me of the battles that Max has had with Lewis. We'll talk about that in a bit. But also the battle that Max has had with Charles at the beginning of 2022, at least. And actually, even in 2022 Austria, if you want to go that far back as well, but Charles ended up winning. And so I have to go back and watch that race. But I think there was a little bit of wheel-to-wheel over there too, or at least they were in close chase with one another. So I think that'd be a good breakdown to do maybe at another time. But clearly, I felt like Max was going to bully his way into not letting Lando pass. Like, that was my takeaway from it. And I wonder if this sort of goes back to what we talked about last week, right? Where now he looks at himself as I don't want to say the elder statesman, but like the guy who's being hunted, and therefore he feels like he has to play defense. So that was my sort of first takeaway, is like he's just going to try to get Lando there. But I do think this confirms one of those things that we've said all along, which is when you start to put pressure on Red Bull, they can have a bad weekend. And I would say that if the number one sort of antagonist in all of this, if you're Max Verstappen, is your own team. They pitted him arguably a little too late. They're wrong with their tire selection, obviously, because he was on scrubbed mediums, right, or used mediums. I don't know how far they were used, but they certainly were. And then they did a bad pit stop, which then ended up, with him being held back a little bit. So I know we'll get into those details, but that's kind of where my first thoughts went. And I do have something for Christian Horner too, by the way, but we'll
okay.
get into that later.
I mean, I have to say it's not. It's not often that we see Red Bull make mistakes in battles. So that pit stop was something pretty huge. And yeah, he was on used tires when Lando was on new tires, but I don't know what he had available to him. I know he had a couple of sets of hards, didn't he, Max? And they stuck him on used. Was it used mediums he was on it in the final stint? I have to say, I might have missed
He
that.
was on the used one. Yeah, I missed that too until a little bit later. But yeah,
Sure.
yeah, he was on used medium. So
But let's just talk about the actual series of events. So Lando had DRS and he had a couple of bites, right? So one bite where he went up the inside of Max. Max then took the escape road, got past him again, and didn't give the place back.
yeah,
He then had
yeah,
another episode where he essentially did a dive bomb down the inside, braked much later than Max, locked up and went into the runoff on the outside of turn 3, and then finally gets a good run on him, tries to get him around the outside, and Max moves to the outside, doesn't leave enough room. They have contact. Max has a puncture to his left rear, and Lando has a puncture to his right front, doesn't he? And he ends up having to retire the car. But at this point, Lando's already been done for track limits, right? So he's got a penalty coming his way anyway. Included in that is his is the runoff episode where he locked up and gone into the runoff. So he was going to get a penalty anyway. And then he had been complaining, and we saw it as well, to be honest. But I do want to have your take on this as well. Lando complained multiple times that Max was moving in the braking zone, and he was even on the radio. He was very eloquent about this. He was saying, "I'm making a move, and Max is making the same move to cover me. He's not allowed to do that." And this takes me back to when I first watched, the 2016 season. If you watch what Max was doing in a Red Bull at that point, Suzuka against Vettel was case in point. Final chicane, comes into the corner, Vettel's going past him, he makes a move immediately to cover him off late in the braking zone. This is not new for Max, but I do want to know what you felt about that leading up to
yeah.
that big
I was
incident.
going to say you brought up 2016, right? And I remembered something similar from that year too, right? It was Spa, where Kimmy had kind of come on the radio and kind of said the same thing. They were going up the run up of Eau Rouge, and then taking that next turn, and he came on the radio and said, "I'm just going to move out of Max's way because all he really wants to do is run me off the track." And in many ways, this race was identical, right? All the three moves that you described and ultimately ending with that. We saw Max Verstappen of old, and I got to thinking about this a little bit more and said, why is he so desperate to do what he was doing there? Because with the Lando 5-second penalty, he could have arguably made that difference, and even if he would have finished behind him on track, he could have. I mean, I don't know. It's a little bit hard to say with how it really looked like McLaren had the tires and the tire management down to where Lando could have pulled a 5-second gap. But if he was smart enough, and we have given him nothing but credit as the last couple of weeks, and even for most of the season, to say, okay, look, we just got done talking about raising the ceiling versus raising the floor, and we said Max is someone who does both, and it's just ironic that we said this like not 3 days ago, and this is kind of where we're coming back to, right?
Yeah, this is important because we did a video 2 videos ago, were entitled "Edge of Greatness," right? That I thought that Max was on the edge of greatness. Now, I said in that video that I think you can put him in that top 5, but there is a reason why I cannot put him number 1. Right.
Yeah.
And I've said it again and again and again that I have not seen since 2021 what would happen, what Max would do if he's put in that situation again, where he's put under intense pressure for a race win. And you could say that in Miami he was magnanimous about the whole thing, but he could fall back to the safety car and say, "Oh, it wasn't me." And similarly in other situations where he's had to pass, he's done it cleanly. He's just gone ahead and done it. But it's always been against cars that you would expect him to pass anyway. But this time he was under threat from a Lando that had a car that was quicker than him and was going to take the race win from him, and he reverted back to type again. Something that I think a lot of people thought had had gone, that he had matured past, but he hasn't. And that's why when I talk about the edge of greatness, you still have to talk about that. That's why I can't put him number one, because it's the reason I can't put Senna at number one, why I can't put Michael Schumacher at number one, because they have that edge to them that says it's arrogance in a way that says, I am the king, you're not getting past me, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to stop you coming past or come past you at whatever cost. And before we move on, I do want to this isn't just me saying it. Andrea Stella had this to say after the race, and I'm going to quote it directly because he's very eloquent in what he says. I see it as the entire population in the world will know who's responsible for that incident, except for a group of people. But the problem behind it is that if you don't address these things honestly, they will come back. They have come back today because they were not addressed properly in the past, when there was some fights with Lewis that needed to be punished in a harsher way. What have I been saying, right? This is what we needed to see, is what he would do.
Well, can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
That is very rich coming from Andrea Stella right now, on the heels of this race. Where was he in 2021? I don't disagree with the logic. I don't disagree with what he's saying. He is spot on with that, right? In terms of his analysis and how to correct behaviors. And we've talked about, and in this race, you can argue that the stewards could have done more even before that final incident happened, right? Like, it could have been, but that's very rich for him. Come on, you can't. You expect me to take him seriously because his driver just went out and he's upset about that? I mean, you think he says that if that was happening with Charles? He's not going to say that.
No, but he had a microphone put under his face, and
okay, fair enough. But I mean, this is how it's been judged. It was okay. It was okay.
Okay,
21.
Okay. But do you disagree with him?
No, I don't disagree with him. I think this is, but I can't. Look, but I can't take him that seriously, right? Because if I'm the one who's hurt in that moment, and I get why he's saying that, he has to say that. He has to. I mean, so did Christian Horner.
You think he doesn't believe it?
Good God! Like, let me get into him for a second here. Oh my God, Christian Horner. Goodness gracious! But I'll come back to him. But for Stella to say that, look, I can agree, Shaz, but at the same time, I mean, this could have been said earlier too, right? I mean, and what is up with teams not standing for what is right when it does not impact
it's not
them,
in their
right?
If you're going to stand, it's not in their competitive advantage to do that.
But he believed that in 2021. So why wouldn't that be raised before? And I guarantee you, if Fred Vasseur was in his place, he would have said the same thing as
I don't think he would have.
And I would agree. And,
of course he would have. But he has to be asked the question. Right, in 2021, no one was turning to McLaren to ask them for an opinion about Max and Lewis. The only people that anyone was interested in talking to were Toto and Christian. So, I mean, fine, I take your point. Look, it's happened to him, and therefore he said something. But it doesn't take away from the fact that what he said absolutely makes sense. It mirrors what we have been saying, or certainly what I have been saying, ever since a video that we did back in March.
I think you're right with your logic of saying on the edge of greatness, and I have to walk my statement back because I was the one sort of holding your feet to the fire and saying, why not? And I think this race showed to me why not, right? So I think you're right. So let's just start there. And I did see this level of immaturity because, again, there was a good chance that he would have won the race even if he had let Lando pass, right? He could have saved his tires. He could have just been within 5 seconds and he would have been fine. But just the way he did it, right? The moving under braking. Am I not right in saying this or remembering this? That wasn't that rule specifically created because of him?
Yes.
Right? So I guess my question is, what are the race stewards? What is the FIA wanting to do about this? Like, so they're just not going to penalize him if that's going to happen? Because he seemed to have done that repeatedly, and I think you could see shades of that in the sprint race too. Though Lando got it wrong there himself, so he has no one to blame but himself.
Yeah,
but like, if they're not going to do it, then just don't do it. And this has been my problem with. By the way, I'll bring up science here too, because what was that race? Was it in China or wherever it was before that, or when he had the incident with Oscar? And it's the same thing. It's the inconsistent refereeing that's happening throughout these races. Like, if it's going to be there, it's going to be. And And I don't want to hear about not having.
That was a different
okay,
situation.
I know it's a different thing. But I'm not talking about a different situation. I'm talking about inconsistency is what I'm talking about, really. Which is so this you could have penalized Max at least a couple of times there. Why wasn't he penalized for not giving the position back? All of those things can be said, but this is the problem which I think Formula One desires to have, because this race has again put Formula One back on the map, and that we're all going to be talking about the controversy, right? That's what they desire, and so therefore I don't think you're going to get that kind of correction, because I don't know that there's another driver like Max on the grid who does that. Oh, maybe outside of Magnussen, by the way, and this is a good time to bring Magnussen up too, right? Because he did get those penalties, right?
Yeah.
And of course, but he was so way over the line that you couldn't even argue.
Yeah, but you could argue some of this was as well, but perhaps at this point, like Lewis showed what Max is like under pressure in 2021, right? And for me, that's a big black mark against Max. Like, everyone's going to come for me in the comments about this, but see, this isn't just me saying it. There are other people in the paddock that think the same thing. And Andrea Stella's been very clear about that. But
one thing you can lay to rest now is that the whole theory about Max races Lewis a certain way, right? Because now he's evidently raced his best friend.
Yeah, it's situational, isn't it? It's situational. It's like I will not get beaten by anybody.
But I mean, but you can see this was happening. This was brewing since Miami, right? Because when the safety car thing happened in the opposite direction in Canada, what's the first thing we heard from radio? So clearly, the Red Bull team holds grudges, despite having won as much as they have. They hang on to every bit of thing that's gone against them. They have those chinks in the armor, so you can see that this was going to happen.
But Ammar, this is the pattern that drives Max to this, right? He will show aggression, and often people will just back off him.
Can you tell me why he doesn't show that to Charles then? Is that because Charles is just fight fire?
I do want to come back to that. I do want to come back to that, because that's a very, very good point. It's a very good point. But generally, people fall back off Max. They let him get away with his aggression because they don't want to have an accident, and that's why Max gets away with the stuff that he does. But as soon as the person behind him or in front of him is as desperate to win the race as he is, his driving will cause an accident. That's why, like, throughout 2021, whenever Lewis and Max were in the same vicinity, I thought, oh my God, this is going to happen again. And I'm sure Lando fans at the end of Austria were thinking the same thing again, that this is going to end in an accident. Like, for once, I could sit back and just watch it and just be really happy to see it unfold. But
just be awake for once.
Yeah. It was good to be able to do that. But the Charles comparison is a good one, because at the beginning of 2022, and even up until Austria 2022, Max and Charles raced really cleanly. And I don't know if the more I see of Max and his aggression in these situations, the more it suggests to me that was Charles driving him smart. It was Charles going, okay, I'm not going to have an accident, but I'm still going to get past you. And my aggression comes out in a very different way. Like, I'll use the DRS in a clever way, or I will use a line that you just cannot cover. Like that move that he made into turn 4 in Austria in 2022 to get him the lead on Max. He passed him 3 times in that race, I think, didn't he? He was able to put himself in a situation where there was no question about the fact that he was going to get past. And the DRS chicken that he played with him in Bahrain, he just flummoxed Max in that race. So I wonder if Charles just has that special ingredient that so far nobody else has been able to come up with. And up until now, like you said, I've kind of thought, is it Max just racing one driver particularly differently? And maybe that's not it. Maybe it's Charles was just driving him in a much smarter way than he'd been driven against before.
Yeah, I also think there's something about Charles that is there's certain quality. It's hard for me to describe in words, right? But I think in terms of the aggression, the desperation that you talk about, I think they're kind of similar in that way, and they've raced each other for years too. So maybe there's an element of that as well that plays into it. Versus he looks at Lando as a bit of a protege, if you will, and he looked at Lewis Hamilton as the guy from the previous generation, right? So there might be a little bit of that as well. But I think you're right. Yeah. I think what this also goes to show is that Max is just simply wired to be desperate to win no matter what, because he really got lucky, right? And then he was still able to capitalize on his lead, largely because both Charles and Lando couldn't really do anything. I mean, otherwise he basically had thrown away a race. And I cannot believe that he came out of that incident unscathed in that regard, right? Of course, he lost he lost positions, but that was going to happen the second they decided to go that way, right? I think he got really, really lucky in that happened. And I think this is probably another thing you can put in terms of difference between him and Hamilton, and that Hamilton looks at the season as a whole, right? Versus he's just wired to win every race.
Yeah.
Even his post-race comment, right? He was asked that, like, why did you do that? Like, and then his response was something to the effect, well, I could have just stayed at home too. I'm like, okay, but it's not that black and white, is it?
But in certain situations, I love that. Right, you can have that mentality. Last time we did a video on this, I said that as a positive for Max. I don't mind that. Go for it. That defines him. He gets in a car, and every time he gets in a car, he's absolutely on it, wired to win. But that doesn't mean you need to drive your rival off the road.
But you know what,
things are not mutually exclusive.
What is true now is that he knows, and they know at Red Bull, that their car is not the quickest in the race anymore. So, I mean, you started our video by talking about, how qualifying was put together so well by Max. He's kind of done a bit of a Charles Leclerc, right? In that he has put Red Bull on the map in terms of getting pole and getting it by a wide margin, and that he's able to extract everything out of their car over a single lap. And yes, the 4/10 is great, but it translates into them still losing today. I mean, they would have lost had, and this is second week in a row, right? So, but I mean, it would have been close. Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe the pit stop being better, maybe that's another 2-3 seconds there, right? But I mean, they clearly he feels it, right? Because he said that after the last race too. He said that he was a bit surprised to be on pole too, although he did smash everyone by a wide margin. But clearly there is enough there, and we've said this all along. If you put Red Bull under pressure, at some point, the cumulative effect of everything that's been going on is going to add up as well. So
yeah, for sure. You wanted to talk about Christian Horner.
Oh my God, Christian Horner, man, that's rich coming from that guy. Like seriously, I think he was asked after the race, like what he thought of the incident. Now, I get that you have to defend your driver, right? Just as I said with Andrea Stella too, right? I mean, good God, his first instinct is to go back to Lando and say, oh yeah, he had been off tracks and track limits was an issue. And it was like, that's your reason for what your guy did, even while he kind of admitted that this was going to happen because they botched the pit stop and they were clearly not the quicker car. So I don't even understand. So this is great, right? And we can talk about this at a different time. I'm going to put this in my something to ponder folder, right? Which is that you can see where he's now so desperate to hang on to Max with all of the rumors that he's going to do everything he can to defend his guy at the expense of others. I've just never seen a lame excuse than, oh, Norris track limits. When your guy is the one who's breaking under turns and he's doing everything in the book that he should be doing, like that's really, really rich, while not addressing one bit of that, by the way. So
I thought Helmut Marko was actually the most balanced on all of this afterwards, saying that, we probably should have told Max earlier about the 5-second penalty, but
you shouldn't have had to say that. I mean, you could look. What's the worst? You could have ended up with a second too, right? Like, I mean, that's just crazy. Like, of course, in hindsight, everything could be done better, right? I mean, in hindsight, Charles would have put together a better qualifying lap, maybe even been in the race win today. That's not how this works.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. We're going to have to pivot a little bit because there was somebody that won the race.
It was there.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, Ammar, how much more information do you need? What do you need?
Come on,
what does it need to
you
do?
cannot do this. You cannot do this. You cannot do this.
With 5 minutes to go. With 5 minutes to go, what does George Russell need to do to get your seal of approval? He's now won a race.
He must be a praying man. I mean, I need to know which God he prays to. That's my takeaway. But well, first of all, shout out to our friend F1 Diplo for he's a big George Russell supporter, and he is elated. I can tell from his social media. Look, George ran a good race. I mean, for the most part, he was in a bit of like in no man's land, right? He was nowhere. He was just kind of running his race, and You got to be in it to win it. He definitely was. He had the battle with Lewis earlier on. It seemed like Lewis had some damage. I think Lewis indicated. So I think there was a little bit of that. But I think
we'll put a
race was
picture of the damage up.
We'll put a picture there.
Yeah, because it was not
I think
insignificant.
it was not insignificant. But even so, I mean, even him being on the podium by itself would have been great, right? So I think this was a really good result for him. I don't know that if you're going to do the Hamilton Russell comparison, that this I would put this. I mean, this is win is a win is a win. But yeah, there you go.
I would. Ammar, like, what does the guy need to do?
Circumstances for Lewis too, right? So he did everything right. This is me not taking anything wrong, but he would be the first to tell you that he inherited this win largely because of what the two other people did.
Yeah. But so Martin Brundle will tell you always, you make your own luck in this game. He outqualified his teammate. He outqualified his teammate across the entire weekend. Managed his tires well enough that he wasn't like out of the window.
Can we not just enjoy the race win without like okay, like can we be balanced? Like
I'm going to use every opportunity. No, man, I have to use every opportunity.
This is what you're going to do. So when the opposite happens, I want you to remember the same too, right? Like, and oh, by the way, he almost crashed thanks to Toto Wolff, right? So that would, oh man, I never wish for anyone to get any kind of hurt or damage, but good God, that would have been fun. He spun off or something and lost. So,
oh my God, I really hope that doesn't become a soundbite, man. Ammar wanted George to crash.
No, I did not want him to crash. I just wanted him to spin out, not get hurt. I would never wish that upon anyone. But,
I thought he had a great weekend, right? Like he had a couple of tenths on Lewis throughout. Yeah, Lewis got damaged twice in competitive sessions, but that was him running over curbs at the end of the day. The contact with Sainz, I have to say, I watched the whole race and I was just thought, where is Lewis's pace? He seemed to be on Carlos's tail for a few laps after he'd had to give the place back, and then it seemed to just disappear. And then we heard that he's got a bit of floor damage, and then I saw the picture after the race, and I thought, okay, fine, that's why he had no pace. But he was in that situation because he didn't qualify as well as George did. I keep saying it. He needs to do better in qualifying. Okay. And this weekend, I think the car didn't work for him. There's a bit too much understeer in the car. The telemetry from qualifying, which again, I'm really sorry we weren't able to bring that to you over the weekend. But you could see, especially to turn 9 and 10, Lewis is having to back off the throttle much, much more than George is. Because I think George was able to live with that understeer better than Lewis was. It was just a bit irritating to watch that. But George did the business, and he got himself in a position, and he didn't lose his head, and he got a race win out of it.
Yeah,
I thought it was well deserved.
Let's also give a shout out to Oscar too, right? Because he could have been in there for that race win. I mean, this if anyone has a good reason to say ifs and what, I mean, he is the one, because really hard done by that harsh penalty. And
just
look, that could have been that was another break for Red Bull. I'll add there too, because had two of them 100%. Been there, that would have been game over for Max. Really, and they wouldn't even have that.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it was he's going to be ruining that penalty, because it was, what is the point of having this new system of track limits in Austria, where you know that the penalty for going wide is that you end up in the gravel, you're going to lose time, you gain no advantage by doing that. So being just a little bit over the white line and dipping your tires in the gravel should not earn you a track limits infringement.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think if anything, if you're able to go through that trap and still put on a good lap, then you should be applauded
for that, not penalized.
You give them one more position. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, look,
I don't know about that. But
if there's anyone, I mean, I feel bad for him. I really do, because he did have a bit of a half chance at the end too. I mean, but that would have been his. This would have been his race, given how Max and Lando were going.
I would have been super.
Can we also give a shout out to my guy, Carlos Sainz, right? Because he did out-qualify Charles. I mean, and you've been on him the last few races, and seemingly the car has been getting back to Charles, or whatever the case might be. He was in it to win it too, and I can't blame him for it. I have to be honest with you. I'm getting a little bit worn out with all the waiting on his decision. Like this, it's just getting too much. Like, decide already, man. It really doesn't matter at this
Yeah, it sounds
point.
like, well, I mean, this is a conversation that maybe we should have again later in the week, but I don't think Carlos is, or his camp are particularly doing him any favors at the moment. Ammar, I think we're about to run out of time. I think on that bombshell, it's time to call it. I'm sure everyone will want to leave a comment on that one. I'm sure there's a lot to say. Dig into us, complain about us, whatever you like. We will read every single comment and we will reply to as many as we possibly can. If you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please subscribe. We're nearly at 1,000 subs. The more if you guys join us, the more we can do. But we will see you in the next one.
Fix it, Fred.